Venice, the rise of an empire without land or armies. On a muggy summer morning in 840 AD, Byzantine ambassador Theodorus gazed in stunned disbelief at what appeared to be a mirage shimmering above the Adriatic waters. There, rising improbably from a malarial swamp, stood a city of marble palaces and gilded domes, its foundations seemingly floating on the sea itself. What Theodorus witnessed that day was neither mirage nor miracle, but something perhaps even more remarkable: the emergence of history's most improbable empire, built not through conquest, but through cunning. This was Venice, a city of refugees who had transformed their watery hiding place into the world's most sophisticated commercial powerhouse, a kingdom without land, an empire without armies. The story of how Venice rose to dominate medieval Europe and the Mediterranean without ever fielding a significant land army represents one of history's greatest anomalies. While other empires conquered their way to prominence, Venice developed a different kind of power altogether. A thrilling combination of ruthless commerce, calculated diplomacy, and technological innovation that would ultimately create more wealth, wield more influence, and last longer than the Roman Empire itself. This is the tale of how a group of swamp-dwelling outcasts outsmarted every major power of their age and wrote the playbook for how small nations can compete with superpowers, a playbook still studied from Singapore to Silicon Valley today. The birth of Venice, a city born of necessity. The Huns came at dawn. As Attila's horsemen thundered across the northern Italian plain in 452 AD, the wealthy citizens of Aquileia faced a stark choice: die defending their ancient Roman walls, or flee to the one place their mounted pursuers couldn't follow, the sprawling maze of saltwater lagoons that stretched along the Adriatic coast. Within hours, the lagoon's shallow waters churned with boats as desperate refugees piled their families, gold, and whatever else they could carry onto any vessel that would float. They were racing not just against Attila's army, but against history itself. These refugees, many of them skilled craftsmen and shrewd merchants, found themselves marooned in one of Europe's most inhospitable environments. The lagoon was a shifting patchwork of mudflats, channels, and tiny islands that appeared and disappeared with each tide. Mosquitoes swarmed in toxic clouds above waters too brackish to drink. The only solid ground consisted of barrene, patches of salt marsh just inches above sea level, and *velm*, mud banks that vanished entirely during high tide. It was the last place anyone would choose to build a city. But necessity, as it often does, bred innovation. The refugees' first breakthrough came when they discovered that oak pilings driven deep into the lagoon's clay bottom would petrify in the salt water, becoming harder than stone. They began driving thousands of these pilings in tight clusters, creating artificial foundations for buildings that seemed to float above the waves. It was backbreaking work, but it gave birth to an engineering tradition that would later construct the world's most sophisticated shipyards. More importantly, it taught the early Venetians their first crucial lesson: their greatest weakness, the hostile lagoon environment, could become their greatest strength. By 500 AD, these accidental pioneers had established something unprecedented: a network of island communities that could neither be approached by land nor easily navigated by those unfamiliar with the lagoon's treacherous channels. While the rest of Italy descended into the chaos of barbarian invasions, Venice's watery barriers created a pocket of stability where Roman traditions of craftsmanship and commerce survived. The refugees had stumbled upon the perfect defensive position, one that required no standing army to maintain. But mere survival wasn't enough for these ambitious castaways. Their unique position at the head of the Adriatic, where the maritime routes of the Mediterranean met the river networks of northern Europe, presented an opportunity. While other medieval cities huddled behind walls, Venice's early leaders made a bold decision. They would build their security, not through fortifications or armies, but through making themselves indispensable to every major power in the known world. Their city would become what we might today call a platform, an essential middleman that every other state needed to do business. The gamble paid off spectacularly. By the early 600s, Venetian merchants were already developing sophisticated financial instruments to fund trading voyages. They pioneered marine insurance, letters of credit, and double-entry bookkeeping centuries before these innovations reached the rest of Europe. Their ships began carrying luxury goods from Constantinople to the barbaric kingdoms of the West, while their diplomats played Byzantine emperors against Frankish kings with the finesse of master chess players. This was the true genius of early Venice, recognizing that power could flow from positioning rather than possession. While other cities measured their strength in soldiers and territories, Venice focused on controlling the channels of commerce and information. They didn't need to conquer lands when they could control the trade that made those lands wealthy. It was a revolutionary approach to empire building that would eventually make Venice the richest and most influential city in Europe. All because a group of refugees had the audacity to build a city where no city should exist. Through necessity, they had discovered a truth that would shape the next 1,000 years of history. Sometimes the greatest power comes not from the ability to take something by force, but from making yourself impossible to do without. Venice, masters of diplomacy and influence. In 812 AD, a Venetian diplomatic mission arrived at the court of Charlemagne in Aachen bearing an extraordinary gift, a pipe organ of such sophistication that it left the Frankish emperor's musicians baffled. The instrument, with its intricate system of brass pipes and hydraulic pumps, represented Byzantine technological mastery that the West had lost centuries ago. But the real masterpiece wasn't the organ itself. It was the political choreography behind its delivery. The organ had originally been a gift from Byzantine Emperor Michaelbert I to Venice. Instead of keeping it, the Venetians immediately re-gifted it to Charlemagne, a calculated move that simultaneously flattered the Frankish ruler while subtly demonstrating Venice's intimate connection to Constantinople's superior civilization. This single diplomatic gesture encapsulated everything that would make Venice great: their ability to position themselves as essential intermediaries between East and West, their talent for turning gifts into tools of influence, and their uncanny knack for appearing supremely valuable to everyone, while remaining loyal to no one but themselves. Behind Venice's glittering diplomatic facade lay a network of intelligence that would have impressed modern spy agencies. Their merchants didn't just trade goods, they traded information. Every Venetian captain was required to report not just financial transactions, but also military movements, court gossip, and technological innovations observed in foreign ports. These reports went to the newly created Council of Ten, which maintained what was effectively the world's first commercial intelligence database. When Byzantine officials wondered how Venice always seemed to anticipate their moves, they were missing the fact that Venetian traders had already reported their private dinner conversations weeks earlier. The city's greatest diplomatic coup came through a seemingly mundane innovation: standardized diplomatic gift packages. Venice's rulers noticed that foreign courts were particularly impressed by exotic animals. They began maintaining a menagerie on the island of San Giorgio Maggiore, carefully breeding leopards, giraffes, and elephants obtained through their eastern trade routes. These animals could be quickly deployed as diplomatic gifts, along with standardized packages of Murano glass, spices, and luxury textiles. While other medieval powers scrambled to arrange appropriate gifts for foreign dignitaries, Venice had effectively created the world's first diplomatic fulfillment center. This systematic approach to diplomacy reached its zenith in the Marriage of the Sea ceremony. Each year, the Doge would sail out into the Adriatic on the Bucentoro, a vessel so magnificent it made royal barges look like fishing boats, and drop a golden ring into the waves, symbolically wedding Venice to the sea. Foreign ambassadors were required to attend, and their strictly assigned positions on viewing boats created a visible hierarchy of Venice's diplomatic relationships. The message was clear: you might be a king or emperor on land, but in the waters of the Adriatic you were merely a guest at Venice's wedding. But Venice's masterstroke was its manipulation of religious politics. While officially devoted to St. Mark, whose stolen relics they had enshrined in the world's most opulent church, Venice maintained a careful balance between Rome and Constantinople. When Byzantine emperors demanded religious conformity, Venetian diplomats would hint at closer ties with the Vatican. When popes pressed for support against the East, Venice would emphasize their Byzantine heritage. This religious flexibility allowed them to trade freely in Muslim ports while simultaneously financing crusades, a diplomatic contradiction that only Venice could pull off. The true elegance of Venice's approach lay in its sustainability. Unlike empires that depended on military might, Venice's diplomatic power was self-reinforcing. Each successful negotiation made them more essential to the next one. Each trade deal increased their importance as intermediaries. They had discovered what modern tech companies would later reinvent: the power of the network effect. The more connections Venice built, the more valuable those connections became, creating a diplomatic compound interest that would accumulate for centuries. Masters of financial innovation: how Venice shaped modern finance. On a crisp morning in 1156, a crowd gathered at the Rialto to witness something revolutionary: the world's first government bond auction. Venice needed money to fund its latest commercial fleet, and rather than raise taxes or beg from foreign monarchs, they had invented an entirely new financial instrument. They were selling pieces of paper that promised regular interest payments backed by the city's salt tax revenues. The concept seemed absurd to visiting merchants. After all, how could mere paper be worth anything? But by sunset, the bonds had sold out completely, and modern public finance was born. This wasn't just clever bookkeeping, it was financial alchemy. Venice had discovered how to turn future tax revenue into immediate cash, creating capital out of thin air. The city's great merchant families, who initially bought these bonds as a civic duty, soon realized they could trade them among themselves. Within decades, the steps of the Rialto hosted history's first secondary market, complete with specialized brokers who did nothing but trade government debt. When other European rulers heard about this financial sorcery, they were baffled. How had a city without gold mines or vast territories created more liquid wealth than kingdoms 10 times its size? The answer lay in Venice's unique approach to risk. Their merchants had developed the colleganza, a revolutionary business contract that allowed investors to finance trading voyages without risking more than their initial investment. This limited liability concept, radical for its time, meant that ambitious young merchants could secure backing for risky but profitable ventures into unknown markets. Meanwhile, wealthy patricians could spread their investments across multiple ships, creating the world's first diversified portfolios. When a young Marco Polo set out for China, he did so backed by a network of Colleganza contracts that spread the enormous risk among dozens of investors. Venice's real genius emerged in their standardization of maritime commerce. They created the first state-sponsored insurance system, requiring all ships using their port to pay into a mutual fund that would compensate merchants for losses at sea. This seemingly simple innovation had profound effects. Merchants could now take bigger risks, knowing they were protected against catastrophic losses. More importantly, it gave Venice detailed data about shipping patterns, losses, and trade routes, information they could use to optimize their own operations while selling intelligence to others. At the heart of this commercial empire sat the Venetian ducat, a gold coin so pure and uniformly minted that it became medieval Europe's de facto reserve currency. Unlike other realms that constantly debased their coinage, Venice maintained the ducat's gold content with fanatical precision. The mint's workers lived inside the facility, forbidden from leaving until their term of service ended. Any attempt to tamper with the gold content was punishable by death. This obsession with monetary stability meant that by 1300, contracts from Egypt to England specified payment in Venetian ducats. But perhaps their most subtle innovation was the creation of artificial scarcity. Venice's rulers realized that controlling access to markets was more profitable than controlling the markets themselves. They instituted the first patent system, granting monopolies to inventors of new manufacturing techniques. When Murano glassmakers developed revolutionary new methods, they were given exclusive rights, but only if they practiced their craft exclusively in Venice. Similar arrangements bound shipwrights, silk weavers, and other skilled craftsmen to the city, creating concentrated clusters of expertise that no other port could match. The system reached its apex with the Venetian wool trade. Rather than competing directly with established textile centers, Venice positioned itself as the essential middleman. They created specialized wool grades, established quality standards, and developed sophisticated futures contracts that allowed merchants to hedge against price fluctuations. By 1400, a wool merchant in Damascus could buy standardized Venetian contracts for English wool that wouldn't be shorn until the following spring, a level of financial sophistication that wouldn't be seen again until the modern Chicago Mercantile Exchange. The Arsenal Revolution, birth of industrial production. Dante stood at the gates of Venice's arsenal in 1320, watching in awe as a fully equipped warship emerged from its massive doors. The poet would later compare this shipyard to the bubbling pitch of hell in his Inferno asterisk, but what he witnessed that day wasn't demonic. It was the future of industrial production being born. Inside those walls, thousands of workers moved in a choreographed dance of efficiency that wouldn't be seen again until the Industrial Revolution centuries later. The arsenal could build a complete fighting galley in less than 24 hours, an achievement that would have seemed like witchcraft to the rest of medieval Europe. The secret lay not in magic, but in a revolutionary concept: standardized parts. While other shipyards built vessels as unique works of craftsmanship, the arsenal's administrators had divided shipbuilding into discrete, repeatable steps. Curved hull timbers were pre-cut using standardized templates. Oars were produced in exact lengths. Even the rope makers, who twisted their cables in a building longer than 2 football fields, worked to precise specifications. When an English ship needed a replacement rudder, it had to return home for custom fitting. A Venetian vessel could pick up an exact replacement at any Arsenal-operated supply depot across the Mediterranean. Behind this standardization lay something even more revolutionary: the world's first industrial workforce. Arsenal workers, the Arsenalotti, formed a hereditary class of specialized laborers. Children grew up learning specific tasks. One family might specialize in caulking for generations, another in sail-making. But unlike traditional guild structures, the arsenal rotated workers between teams, creating cross-trained specialists who could adapt to production bottlenecks. It was the first instance of modern workforce management, complete with standardized shifts, quality control inspections, and productivity bonuses. The arsenal's innovations extended beyond shipbuilding. They pioneered the use of water power for industrial processes, creating a system of tidal mills that powered sawmills, rope walks, and metalworking hammers. Their wood-preserving techniques were so advanced that oak timbers they treated are still intact today, 5 centuries later. They developed the first floating dry docks, allowing ships to be repaired without fully disassembling them. When Leonardo da Vinci visited in 1500, he filled dozens of notebook pages with sketches of arsenal machinery, many of which would influence his own mechanical designs. Yet the arsenal's most remarkable achievement was its creation of the first modern supply chain. The facility consumed vast quantities of raw materials: oak from Croatia, pine from the Alps, pitch from Dalmatia, iron from Elba. Rather than rely on merchants, the arsenal established its own procurement network. They bought entire forests, contracted directly with miners, and maintained a fleet of supply ships that operated on strict schedules. It was the first example of vertical integration in industrial history, and it gave Venice an insurmountable advantage in naval production. The system reached its zenith during the War of Cyprus in 1570. When an Ottoman fleet destroyed much of Venice's navy, the arsenal worked around the clock to rebuild it. In just 100 days, they produced 100 galleys, complete with arms and supplies, a feat that would remain unmatched until American shipyards during World War II. This wasn't just fast construction. It was the first demonstration of modern surge production capacity, proving that standardized industrial processes could respond to emergencies faster than any traditional manufacturing system. But perhaps the arsenal's most enduring legacy was invisible. It created the first culture of industrial secrecy. Visitors were carefully screened. Workers were forbidden from sharing technical details. Innovations were treated as state secrets. When a group of English shipwrights tried to copy arsenal techniques in 1600, they found themselves blocked by layers of security that anticipated modern industrial espionage protection. The arsenal had discovered another fundamental truth of industrial power. Sometimes the most valuable product is the production process itself. The Fourth Crusade, Venice's masterstroke of financial and political power. In the summer of 1202, an army of 30,000 French knights and soldiers arrived at Venice, ready to sail for Jerusalem. What they didn't realize was that they had already lost control of their crusade. Through a series of masterful financial and diplomatic maneuvers, Venice had transformed a holy war into a hostile takeover, one that would reshape the medieval world and demonstrate how financial power could triumph over military might. The trap had been set months earlier, when Venice agreed to transport the Crusader army to Egypt. The contract they offered seemed straightforward: Venice would halt all commercial shipping for a year, convert their merchant fleet to troop transports, and provide supplies for the expedition. The price, 85,000 silver marks, was high but not outrageous. What the Crusaders missed was the fine print. The entire amount had to be paid before departure, and Venice would have sole control over the fleet's destination. When the Crusaders arrived short of funds, Venice's Doge, Enrico Dandolo, unveiled the second phase of his plan. Instead of cancelling the expedition, he offered the Crusaders a deal. They could work off their debt by helping Venice capture the rebellious city of Zara on the Dalmatian coast. The Crusaders, stranded and desperate, agreed, despite the fact that Zara was a Christian city under the protection of the Pope. For the first time in history, a Crusader army had been transformed into a private military contractor. Dandolo, though in his 90s and blind, personally led the assault on Zara. The city fell in November, but this was just a rehearsal for Venice's real target. While the Crusader army wintered in Zara, Venetian agents were busy in Constantinople, where a succession crisis had created an opportunity. They located Alexios Angelos, a claimant to the Byzantine throne, and brought him to Zara with an irresistible proposal. If the Crusaders would install him as emperor, he would pay Venice's bill, contribute to the crusade, and grant Venice unprecedented trading privileges in Byzantine territory. The plan was breathtaking in its audacity. Venice was proposing to use a Catholic Holy Army to overthrow the world's most powerful Christian empire and make a profit doing it. When Pope Innocent III learned of the scheme, he threatened to excommunicate everyone involved. The Venetians, masters of information warfare, simply prevented his letters from reaching the Crusader army until it was too late. What followed in 1204 was not just a conquest, but a calculated dismantling of a commercial rival. Constantinople fell after a brutal siege, but while the Crusaders looted gold and relics, the Venetians targeted trade records, commercial contracts, and industrial secrets. They stripped the Byzantine shipyards of advanced technology, kidnapped skilled craftsmen, and systematically copied the administrative systems that had made Constantinople great. When the fires died down, Venice emerged with a commercial empire stretching from the Black Sea to the Adriatic. The terms Venice imposed on the new Latin Empire of Constantinople revealed their true genius. Rather than demand territory, they took control of key ports and trading facilities. They acquired the right to trade throughout the empire without paying taxes. Most crucially, they secured a monopoly on banking and financial services in what remained of Byzantine territory. Venice had effectively gained the profits of empire without the costs of administration. The Fourth Crusade revealed a new kind of power politics, one where financial leverage could trump military strength, where commercial contracts could be more potent than armies, and where controlling trade routes mattered more than controlling territory. Venice had shown that with enough planning, even the greatest empire could be undercut by a smaller but more sophisticated rival. It was a lesson that would resonate through history, from the British East India Company to modern economic warfare. The art of economic warfare, Venice's mastery of trade domination. In 1324, the Sultan of Egypt discovered that his realm's grain supplies were mysteriously dwindling. Local merchants blamed a poor harvest, but the truth was far more sophisticated. Venice had quietly cornered the Eastern Mediterranean grain market. They weren't hoarding the grain, they were using it as leverage in trade negotiations. When the Sultan finally agreed to Venice's demanded trading privileges, the grain shortage mysteriously resolved itself. It was economic warfare elevated to an art form. The mastermind behind this operation was Marco Bassaggio, head of Venice's newly created Office of Trade Intelligence. His agents had spent years mapping Egypt's food supply networks, identifying key merchants, and calculating exactly how much grain needed to disappear to create pressure without causing a crisis. The operation's genius lay in its invisibility. The Sultan never realized he'd been manipulated by market forces rather than diplomatic demands. Venice's economic arsenal included weapons more subtle than modern financial instruments. They pioneered the debt trap diplomacy that would later become a staple of international politics. When the Byzantine Empire needed emergency funding in 1267, Venice offered a loan with seemingly generous terms. Hidden in the contract was a clause allowing Venice to seize customs duties as collateral. Within a decade, they controlled the Byzantine Empire's primary source of revenue, while appearing to be nothing more than helpful bankers. But perhaps their most innovative tactic was what modern economists would call network disruption. Venice's intelligence service mapped trade relationships across the Mediterranean, identifying critical nodes where commercial networks could be disrupted. When a rival port city became too successful, Venetian agents would systematically target its key merchants with a combination of bribes, competitive pressure, and strategic lawsuits. The victim city would find its trade networks quietly unraveling without ever realizing it was under attack. The sophistication of these operations reached new heights with the creation of the Black Book, a classified database of commercial intelligence that combined economic data with personal information about foreign merchants and officials. Venetian diplomats could consult this database before negotiations, knowing exactly which trading partners their opponents couldn't afford to lose, which merchants were secretly in debt, and which officials could be swayed by financial incentives. Venice's manipulation of commodity markets would impress modern hedge funds. They developed the first system of strategic commodity reserves, storing vast quantities of crucial goods like spices, alum, and copper. These weren't just for trading, they were weapons. By strategically releasing or withholding supplies, Venice could influence prices across the Mediterranean. When the Genoese tried to corner the alum market in 1298, Venice simply opened their reserves, crashing the price and bankrupting their rivals. The most devastating demonstration of Venice's economic power came during their war with Genoa. Rather than rely solely on naval battles, Venice attacked Genoa's commercial infrastructure. They systematically targeted Genoese banking networks, spread rumors about Genoese merchants' creditworthiness, and used their control of key ports to delay Genoese ships just long enough to make them miss crucial market opportunities. By the time Genoa surrendered, their commercial network had been so thoroughly dismantled that recovery was impossible. Yet Venice's ultimate economic weapon was information itself. Their system of commercial intelligence gathering was centuries ahead of its time. Every Venetian ship captain was required to file detailed reports about prices, political conditions, and commercial opportunities in foreign ports. This data was collated and analyzed by a dedicated team of state economists, the first example of centralized economic intelligence. By 1350, Venice could predict and exploit market movements with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched until the computer age. Venice, the world's first corporate state. When young nobles came of age in Venice, they didn't receive swords or land titles, they received business training. At 16, they were assigned seats in the grain office or salt administration, where they learned to analyze market reports and calculate trading margins. While their counterparts in Paris and London practiced swordplay, young Venetian patricians studied double-entry bookkeeping and maritime law. Venice had created something unprecedented, an aristocracy of merchants where status came not from military prowess, but from commercial success. The physical layout of the city itself reflected this merger of business and state. The Doge's palace wasn't just a seat of government, it was the world's first corporate headquarters. One wing housed state offices, another contained trading floors, and the connecting chambers hosted a constant flow of business negotiations disguised as diplomatic meetings. The palace's famous Bridge of Sighs didn't just lead to prisons, it connected to a complex of accounting offices where teams of auditors scrutinized every commercial transaction that passed through the city. Venice's great innovation was the divided company structure, a revolutionary system that prevented any single family from dominating the state. Major trading ventures were required to split ownership among multiple families, with shares traded on the Rialto exchange. This created the world's first regulated stock market, complete with insider trading laws and disclosure requirements. When one powerful family attempted to corner the pepper trade in 1294, they discovered their trading licenses mysteriously suspended until they sold off their excess shares. The city developed the first system of professional certification for business leaders. Before a noble could serve on Venice's governing councils, they had to prove their commercial competence by successfully managing a trading voyage or running a state business office. Failed merchants were quietly but firmly excluded from power. This created something unique in medieval Europe, a meritocracy based on business acumen rather than birth or military prowess. But Venice's most subtle innovation was its system of enforced collaboration. Major trading expeditions were required to include investments from both old and new money, from both mainland and island families. Ships had to carry cargo from multiple merchants. This forced cooperation created a dense network of business relationships that made it nearly impossible for any faction to act against the collective interest. When one family tried to seize power in 1379, they discovered that their own business partners were their most effective opponents. The state's regulation of private life was equally sophisticated. Nobles were forbidden from engaging in certain profitable trades, forcing them to diversify their investments. Marriage between noble families required state approval, with matches often arranged to strengthen business alliances rather than political ones. Even clothing was regulated. Specific types of silk could only be worn by merchants who had completed certain numbers of successful trading voyages. Venice's patent system revealed the true genius of their corporate state. Unlike modern patents that protect specific inventions, Venetian patents covered business processes and commercial relationships. A merchant might receive a patent on a particular trading route, a manufacturing technique, or even a business relationship with a foreign port. These patents were tradable, creating a market in business rights that helped spread risk and reward across the merchant class. The ultimate expression of Venice's corporate governance was the position of Doge itself. While officially the head of state, the Doge was effectively the CEO of Venice Inc., bound by an elaborate corporate charter that specified everything from investment policies to succession planning. When Doge Michele Morosini tried to favor his family's business interests in 1382, he discovered that Venice's constitutional safeguards made it easier to remove a Doge than a modern board removes a CEO. Masters of Soft Power: How Venice Weaponized Culture. In 1423, a Chinese diplomat arrived in Venice carrying precious porcelain vases as gifts. Within 6 months, Venetian glassmakers had not only reverse-engineered the porcelain's translucent qualities, but improved upon them, creating cristallo glass, a material so pure and clear it would dominate European luxury markets for the next 3 centuries. This wasn't just industrial espionage. It was part of Venice's systematic approach to turning cultural achievement into strategic advantage. Hidden beneath the glittering surface of Venice's artistic achievement lay a sophisticated operation to weaponize culture itself. The city's famous carnival wasn't just a festival, it was a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation. Behind their masks, informants could meet handlers undetected, merchants could negotiate deals away from prying eyes, and Venice's vast spy network could gather intelligence from visitors who let their guards down amid the celebrations. The party, as always in Venice, served the state. Venice revolutionized the concept of national branding. Their architecture wasn't just beautiful, it was a calculated demonstration of power. When foreign diplomats arrived at the Doge's palace, they walked up the giant staircase, passing between massive statues of Mars and Neptune. The message was clear: Venice commanded both war and sea. But the true genius lay in the palace's layout. Foreign ambassadors were subtly routed past evidence of Venetian power, while being made to feel like honored guests. The city's publishing industry became another arm of its influence operation. Venice's printers didn't just produce books, they controlled the flow of information across Europe. By 1500, Venetian presses had published more books than the rest of Italy combined. They carefully managed what information reached which markets, creating Europe's first systematic approach to information warfare. When rumors threatened Venetian interests, counter-narratives would mysteriously appear in printed form across multiple cities simultaneously. Perhaps their most innovative tool was the Golden Book, not the famous registry of nobles, but a classified manual of cultural intelligence. It catalogued the personal tastes, cultural preferences, and artistic interests of every significant foreign leader. When a sultan who loved Persian miniatures needed to be swayed, Venice would send illuminated manuscripts as gifts. When a German prince known for his love of music required convincing, Venetian diplomats arrived with specially composed motets. Venice's mastery of optics extended beyond their famous glass. They pioneered the use of public spectacle as political tool. The launching of a new galleon became an elaborate ceremony that foreign ambassadors were required to attend. These launches were carefully staged to display Venetian naval power while appearing to be mere celebrations. The real message was in the details, the precision of the operation, the scale of the resources, the subtle demonstration that Venice could produce ships faster than any rival. Their intelligence network operated through seemingly innocent cultural exchanges. Venetian art dealers didn't just sell paintings, they gathered information about their clients' finances and politics. Music teachers placed in foreign courts reported on diplomatic conversations. Even Venice's famous courtesans were part of the system, their luxurious salons serving as sophisticated listening posts, where visitors from across Europe would reveal secrets amid wine and wit. But Venice's greatest cultural weapon was its ability to make other powers want to imitate it. They didn't need to conquer territories when foreign rulers voluntarily adopted Venetian styles, Venetian business practices, and Venetian governmental systems. By the 1400s, possessing Venetian luxury goods and adopting Venetian customs had become essential markers of sophistication across Europe. Venice had achieved what modern nations spend billions trying to accomplish. They had made their culture aspirational. The Venetian Model, a timeless blueprint for power and influence. When Singapore's founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, designed his city-state strategy in 1965, he kept returning to one historical example: Venice. Here was the blueprint for how a tiny trading nation could outmaneuver larger powers through superior statecraft, economic sophistication, and strategic positioning. What Lee recognized, and what modern analysts often miss, is that Venice's greatest achievement wasn't its wealth or longevity, but its creation of a reproducible model of state power that transcended military might. Today, this Venetian pattern emerges in unexpected places. When Mark Zuckerberg transformed Facebook from a social network into a digital infrastructure that other businesses couldn't operate without, he was unconsciously following the Venetian playbook. Like Venice's control of Mediterranean shipping lanes, Facebook doesn't need to own content. It profits by controlling the channels through which others must pass. The platform has become the power. Estonia's transformation into a digital republic mirrors Venice's medieval innovations. Just as Venice created standardized contracts and trading procedures that others had to adopt, Estonia's e-residency program is establishing the standards for digital governance. Their digital identity system, like Venice's commercial protocols, gains power not through force, but through voluntary adoption by others who need to access the network. The echo of Venice's arsenal revolution appears in modern Taiwan's semiconductor industry. TSMC, like Venice's shipyards, has achieved dominance not through raw production capacity, but through manufacturing sophistication that others cannot match. Just as medieval powers depended on Venetian ships, modern nations find themselves dependent on Taiwanese chips, proving that control of critical production capabilities can be more powerful than traditional military assets. Dubai's rise from desert port to global hub follows Venice's strategic template with remarkable fidelity. Like medieval Venice, Dubai leverages its position between East and West, creates tax and regulatory advantages to attract trade, and builds infrastructure that others must use. Their ports and air hubs, like Venice's lagoon network, demonstrate how controlling trade routes can generate more wealth than controlling territory. But perhaps the most pure modern incarnation of the Venetian model is Switzerland. Its cantonal system mirrors Venice's complex checks and balances. Its banking secrecy laws echo Venice's information control strategies. Most tellingly, Switzerland's ability to maintain neutrality while making itself indispensable to larger powers is straight from Venice's diplomatic playbook. Like Venice, Switzerland discovered that being everyone's banker is better protection than having a large army. Silicon Valley's obsession with network effects is essentially a rediscovery of Venetian principles. When modern platforms like AWS become so essential that even their competitors must use them, they're employing the same strategy Venice used with its shipping network. The modern term ecosystem could easily describe Venice's interlinked system of trade routes, diplomatic relationships, and financial services. The Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, while often described in traditional geopolitical terms, follows distinctly Venetian logic. Like Venice's trading network, it's less about territorial control than creating infrastructure dependencies. Each port and railway line adds another strand to a web of influence that, like Venice's commercial empire, creates power through connectivity rather than conquest. Yet the Venetian model's most crucial lesson for modern states may be its demonstration that innovation plus positioning can trump scale. Venice proved that a small state with sophisticated systems could outmaneuver larger powers that rely on traditional advantages of size and military might. In an era where digital capabilities and network control increasingly matter more than territorial extent, Venice's blueprint for power without armies becomes increasingly relevant. The Echo of Venice, Lessons in Power and Innovation. In 2023, when OpenAI needed emergency funding to prevent a corporate crisis, the solution came through sophisticated financial instruments and stakeholder negotiations, not unlike how Venice once stabilized its own institutions through complex financial engineering. The parallel wasn't coincidental. Modern capitalism's most sophisticated tools, from venture capital to corporate governance, trace their DNA back to Venetian innovations. But Venice's most profound legacy isn't in specific institutions or techniques. It's in demonstrating alternative forms of power. As modern nations grapple with cybersecurity threats and economic warfare, they're discovering what Venice knew centuries ago. The most effective weapons often don't look like weapons at all. When Russia found itself cut off from SWIFT banking networks in 2022, the ghost of Venice's trade embargoes echoed through the global financial system. The rise of cryptocurrency and decentralized finance unwittingly mirrors Venice's creation of parallel financial systems that operated outside traditional power structures. Like Venice's complex trading networks, these new systems derive their power not from governmental authority, but from creating infrastructure that others need to use. The crypto world's obsession with trustless systems and smart contracts would have been immediately recognizable to Venetian merchants who developed their own automated enforcement mechanisms centuries ago. Modern debates about platform governance and digital sovereignty reflect Venice's core insight. Controlling the architecture of exchange can be more powerful than controlling the exchanges themselves. When the European Union shapes global privacy standards through the GDPR, it's employing the same logic Venice used when establishing Mediterranean trading protocols. Create the standards others must follow, and power flows naturally. Space exploration companies racing to establish satellite networks and plan lunar bases are following a distinctly Venetian trajectory. Identify choke points in future trade routes and secure them early. Just as Venice positioned itself at the crucial intersection of medieval trade routes, modern entities vie to control the orbital paths and logistics networks that will determine future commercial power. As artificial intelligence reshapes global power dynamics, Venice's example becomes increasingly relevant. The critical resource isn't raw computing power or even data, it's the sophisticated integration of technology, commerce, and governance. Those who can create and control these integrated systems, as Venice once did with maritime trade, will shape the future of power. The final lesson of Venice may be this: power flows to those who can imagine new forms of it. Venice succeeded not because they played the game better than others, but because they invented entirely new games where their strengths would matter more than traditional advantages. As humanity stands on the brink of transformative technologies, from artificial intelligence to quantum computing, the ability to envision and create new forms of power may once again determine who shapes the future. In the end, Venice's greatest gift to history wasn't their wealth or their art, or even their innovations. It was their demonstration that imagination, the ability to envision different ways of organizing human activity, can be the greatest power of all. As we face challenges that traditional forms of power seem inadequate to address, from climate change to artificial intelligence governance, Venice's example reminds us that the solutions may not lie in doing old things better, but in imagining entirely new ways of organizing human civilization. The city may be sinking slowly into its lagoon, but its ideas float on, carried by the same currents of human ingenuity that once made a city of refugees into history's most sophisticated power.